Hey everybody, what's going on? For this week's tutorial, we're going to be painting an expressive landscape, and we're going to be talking about things like composition, atmospheric perspective, and mixing greens. So if that's of interest to you, stick around because it's going to be a good one. Hey everybody, I'm Brian McCormick and this is Gallery Bry, where every week there are tutorials on oil painting, gouache painting, and sometimes even digital painting in Procreate. So if that's your thing, and if you want to get better at painting, consider hitting that subscribe button and the notification bell so that you don't miss the videos that come out every week. So with that, grab your paints and let's start mixing. All right, everybody, let's go ahead and get started here. So I already have my underpainting drawn in, and I usually just use burnt umber for that. And I tone the panel just with some gray paint that I have left over. I usually keep a gray pile of paint. It's nice to just keep extra paint in a gray pile because you can use it to modify your colors or to tone a panel. So that's what I use. I'm using a palette of Prussian blue. I'm using burnt umber. I'm using Venetian red, I'm using yellow ochre, and sometimes I'll toss a little bit of cad red in there, but I don't believe I have it for this painting. So I'm starting out by just putting in the sky color. This is mostly Prussian blue, and I tend to tone it down with either a little bit of Venetian red or burnt umber. I don't really like pure Prussian blue, and I don't like those pure blue sky colors. So I like to tone it down a little bit and get it a little bit closer to gray. The brush that I'm using here is a Princeton filbert. It's a number 6, and I will use a lot of different brushes when I paint. Sometimes I use filberts, sometimes I use flats, and I also really like angled brights, but for this particular one I'm just using the filbert. Now I am going in and putting in a little bit more blue in the sky. I just wanted to add a little bit more paint to this and make it a little bit thicker. The paint application that I just put on was a little bit too thin, so I decided to go ahead and add a little bit of additional paint. So right now I'm just putting in some sky holes in so that the trees aren't completely solid. Now these trees aren't as realistic as you would maybe want them in a realist painting. This is a little bit more expressive, so they have a little bit more of a chunkier feel to them. And really this is just a study for me to work on color mixing, brush work, and a lot of other things. So right now I'm putting in the clouds, and I'm using some thicker paint here, and it's not pure white. It's a dulled down white a little bit. There's a little hint of yellow in there. There's probably a little bit of dirty blue on the brush in there, and I'm just putting in a little bit of a shadow color in here. This is mostly going to be Prussian blue and just a touch of Venetian red. You can also use cad red or any other red that you want to get more of a purple color. Now I'm going ahead and putting in the distant hills here. They're a little bit darker right now than what I would want them to be. This is when you want to take atmospheric perspective into consideration. So here I'm making a little bit more purple, adding some different variations to those hills in the background. And atmospheric perspective is when you have the atmosphere filtering out different wavelengths and visibility of things in the distance. So things that are further away will tend to appear lighter in value, and when things get closer they're going to appear darker in value. And then things in the distance will also appear bluer and more purple. That's because the atmosphere will filter out longer wavelengths like reds and yellows and oranges, and that's why you're left with purples and blues, and that's why you see purple mountains in the distance. So you can use that knowledge to create space and distance in your painting just by using the color and the value. Now again, for those hills in the distance, I would have probably liked to have made those a little bit lighter. Sometimes you want to push things a little bit further than what you see in your reference or what you see in life, just so that it makes a better painting and makes it a little bit more clear what you're doing. Now with the trees here, I blocked in some shadow shapes, and I'm going in and putting in the highlights here For my greens, usually I use yellow ochre for my landscapes. I find that cad yellow is just a little bit too pungent and a little bit too chromatic, a little too high in chroma for me. So I'll use yellow ochre, I'll use Prussian blue, and I'll usually tone that down with either a cad red or Venetian red, or more often than not, I use burnt umber. So usually what I'll do is I'll make a mixture of Prussian blue, burnt umber, and then I'll also include a little bit of yellow ochre. And that usually gives me a good color that I like to work with. And you can play around with it and see what you like best, but I find that it makes really good natural greens. Now, what I'm doing here is I'm going ahead and putting in some additional lighter greens. I like to lighten up my greens sometimes with yellow. You don't want to always go to white to lighten up your colors. Sometimes using yellow to lighten up your greens can give you a much nicer effect, a much warmer effect, and when you add white, it tends to cool it down a little bit. So if you want that evening glow that you get from golden hour, you might want to use yellow ochre or cad yellow instead of white. But sometimes using white gives you the lighter green that you're looking for. It just depends on what you're looking at and what time of day it is. And right now I'm just putting in some additional parts into the foreground here. Now, another thing that you want to take into consideration is your composition. So let's talk about that. So right here you can see that I have larger trees on the left, and then I have smaller trees over on the right. Now, this is known as asymmetrical balance. It was also made popular by Edgar Payne, and he called it the Steelyard method. I believe he actually got it from another painter, but I don't recall the name of that person. So if you remember that name, go ahead and drop that down in the comments. But having this asymmetrical balance is a great way to add some interest into your painting, and you can direct the eye of your viewer. If both of the trees were the same size, then you wouldn't exactly know where to look. So this way, when you have larger and smaller trees, it makes it a little bit easier to direct the viewer where you want them to go. All right, everybody, hopefully that was helpful for you. If it was, you can hit this round subscribe icon right here to see more videos like this every week. And if you want to see another video, you can click right over here. So I hope you guys are doing well, and we'll see you next week.